our presentation for navigating the retirement roadmap. Thank you for joining us here today. My name is Jackie Touchet. I'm the wealth leader with Northern Savings. I'm an investment advisor and a life insurance agent as well. We have online today Michelle Munro, who's the director of tax and retirement research with Fidelity Investments. Go. So Northern Savings Credit Union recognizes and acknowledges the First Nation traditional territories under which our service area falls. Northern Savings Credit Union's 4 branches operate in the following communities: Masset, Dawjingites, Prince Rupert, and Terrace. Therefore, we acknowledge the traditional unceded lands of the Haida Nation and the traditional territories of the Tsimshian Nation. So our guest today, Michelle Munro, as I said, is the Director of Tax and Retirement Research with Fidelity Investments. She graduated from the University of Waterloo, joined Fidelity in 2008. She's a leading member of the Tax and Retirement Research team in Women and Wealth. And her interest in planning for life's unexpected events and how to plan for life pivots and manage these sometimes difficult and stressful situations. So once again, thank you for joining us. Our session is recorded today, so we will be sending out our slide deck to our participants today, and also we'll be sharing our presentation so you can share it with your friends and family. I am going to unshare my screen, so Michelle will be able to take over, and we can get on with our presentation here. If I can now see.
I'm going to start talking, Jackie, while you figure that all out. Thank you so much for that warm introduction. And it's my pleasure to be here today, just talking about retirement because it's such a long game, if you will, because you spend years planning for it, saving, and then it could last years as well. So, I'm going to go through. Here we go. Got my slideshow going. Navigating the retirement roadmap. So we're going to take us through a bit of a journey, talking about, well, what does retirement mean? What do people think about retirement? Then we're going to think about, well, what are some of the financial aspects? What are some of the risks in retirement? And then wrap it up with estate planning. So really, there's something for everybody here. And some of it might apply to you today. Some of it may not apply for a few years from now. Some of it may never apply. But really, my key objective is I want people to be thinking about their own personal situation, asking questions, thinking about it with a partner. Well, what should I be thinking? Other family members, what are the impacts here? And you really utilizing Jackie and the Northern Savings Credit Union team to really help you making smart, wise decisions today that could have a huge positive impact on your retirement. So let's get into it. Thinking about retirement. Here's a happy looking guy. And that's what people think about when they retirement. They think like, oh, this is something that we're looking forward to. We're really going to enjoy. And what does retirement think about when you think about retirement? What is your retirement vision? Well, it generally falls into 3 main buckets. The first bucket is, well, play, travel, sports, leisure, what have you. It could also be learning, something of a hobby that you didn't have time to do during your working years. And finally, work. What we see more and more is a growing trend of people who retire from their primary career aren't quite ready for that traditional retirement yet, and more have a phased in approach to retirement. And we'll talk about this a little bit more. But overall, the goal here is to be financially secure enough to make choices for the entirety of your retirement, which leads into, well, how long can we expect retirement to last? Well, this is looking at the average age of retirement going back to the 70s, looking on the left-hand side, that average age of retirement was about age 65. And you can see it lowered to about age 61 in the late 90s, till about 2008. And some of you might remember there was a advertising campaign about freedom 55 and retirement, what have you. And that really reflected a much lower average retirement age than we've seen in previous years, previous decades, really. And then 2008, 2009, well, we can see an increase there. And that's really due to the financial crisis, the economic downturn that happened in 2008, 2009. And we've seen a steady increase. And now we're back to average age of retirement of about age 65. Now, if we think of that, well, that's one bookend of the starting end of when retirement will start. What's the other bookend? And by then we're looking at life expectancy. So this is looking at average life expectancy at age 65. Men are in the blue, women are in the green. What we can see as well, there's gradually increasing, as well as women can expect to outlive men by about 3 years. So this is important, particularly for women, our viewers here, that, well, if we are going to live, say 3 to 4 years longer than our male counterparts, how much more do we need to save during our accumulation years to fund those additional retirement years? Something to be thinking about. And again, we'll come back to this later on in the presentation. So we've created a thinking about, well, what does retirement look like? You have that vision. How long is it going to last? Well, we're looking at 20 years statistically, or could be even longer than that, because these are just averages. So thinking about retirement that could last 20 years, 30 years, or longer. So next I want to shift focus and look at the financial aspects of retirement. Now, this is looking at a life cycle of an investor. And so we're looking years, decades. Starting on the left-hand side, somebody who's in that accumulation years. They have their first job, marriage, just really getting started being an investor. What's really key for someone in this age category or in this life cycle is starting the discipline of saving and investing a little bit from every single paycheck and watching that grow and learning to be an investor. And as we continue up the graph, well, often people have more money to invest, more savings, and are accumulating more. And then when we reach the orange zone, that transition zone, if you will, when people are nearing retirement or even just in retirement, people are really focused on, well, what does that mean? And we'll get into that. But before we do, over on the right-hand side, someone who's living in retirement and drawing down that retirement nest egg to fund their retirement lifestyle. So as I said, somebody who's in that transition zone, they're nearing or just in retirement. I want to go into a deeper dive of what they're thinking about. However, I also want to add the caveat that this conversation could really be spoken about and applied to that entire life cycle. It's just that people really focus on it during those 5 years before and 5 years after retirement. So our first thing we wanted to look at is, well, what are those retirement goals? I should have mentioned, we do a retirement survey every year and we pull it all into a retirement report. And in that survey, we ask people, what does retirement, what would you want to do in retirement? The number one answer is, I'd like to travel. And with travel, that means many different things. It could mean multiple luxury 5-star trips around the globe, meaning very expensive. Or it could be more economical, perhaps locally based road trips within, say, Canada. More economical, obviously. So what are those retirement goals? And then thinking about, well, what are some of the associated expenses with that? What do you expect those expenses to look at? And then what are your sources of income? We call this the retirement paycheck. And I'll get into that on the next slide. But before we do, I want to finish off on this slide. Think about, well, these are also the key years where people are reducing or eliminating their debt. They're also the key years for topping up and really maximizing those retirement savings. And then about 5 years after retirement, because it really takes about 5 years to settle into a post-retirement budget, but that comes from having a retirement budget. So creating one and trying to keep to that. Monitoring how much are you withdrawing from your savings. Want to review those finances annually at a minimum, ideally semi-annually or quarterly. Uh, Finding a social structure. What often happens is that people think like, well, what happens is that during our working years, we work 8+ hours a day, and that also provides a social structure. You move into retirement, and now we have those 8 hours free, and we don't have that same social structure. So it takes time and money reestablish a new social structure. So the money aspect comes from additional lunches, dinners, entertainment, going to sports games, theater, what have you, whatever is unique to you. But often there's an additional cost to that. So incorporating that into a post-retirement budget. So all of that, we're thinking about so many different things. But one of those things I touched upon there is, well, what are the sources of income in retirement? Because it is quite a bit different. During my working years, I work at Fidelity, I get a paycheck, it comes every other week. It pretty much looks the same. But in retirement, there's all these different sources, and we call it the retirement paycheck. So I want to go through what are some of those sources. Well, the first bucket I'll put them in are the government sources, with the two most common ones being Canada Pension Plan and Old Age Security. I'll describe these in a bit more detail on the next slides. But before we get there, so we have the government sources. There could also be an employer source, which is a pension plan. There's two types, a defined benefit pension plan or defined contribution plan. There also could be a group registered retirement savings plan, as well as you would have your own individual savings and investing, an individual registered retirement savings plan, a tax-free savings account, perhaps non-registered investments that will provide interest income, dividends, capital gains. Maybe you'll have rental income. Maybe you have a private corporation that will pay you dividends. Maybe an annuity from a life insurance product. Accessing home equity. This is when one has their big pre-retirement house that they then downsell and downsize into a smaller retirement house, using that net equity to help fund one's retirement. Employment income, down there on the bottom left. I touched upon this a little bit earlier, where we're seeing a growing trend of people who are working in retirement. And so you might ask, well, if they're working, are they really retired? Well, they've retired from their primary career or profession. And now it's a secondary, I'm going to say, it's more of a passion type job. And we looked at the reasons why somebody would continue to work. And it's to stay engaged, to stay busy, to stay active, to be social. As a secondary reason why someone would continue to work are financial. But our research also shows that, well, one of the main reasons for financial is to make life a little bit easier, to thrive versus survive. Over on the right-hand side, we have inheritance as well. And I'll make a little bit of a joke out of this one. I tell my children that if they're hoping as an inheritance from me to be their retirement plan, that is a very risky plan. Because one, I'm going to live a very long time. 2, I'm planning on spending all of my investments. So the inheritance could be, they should plan for it to be, is not a large luxury inheritance. So that's why we have the question marks there. But you can see that there's so many different sources. So many different sources to that retirement paycheck. So let's go into them in a little bit more detail, starting with the government sources, specifically looking at CPP. So CPP, people don't really think about it during their working years. It's a withdrawal from earnings, and it goes and gets accumulated in CPP. Now, depending how much you've contributed during your working years for however X number of years will dictate how much you will actually receive. Now, the standard retirement age is at 65, which is that middle blue line there. And if one is entitled to 100% of the maximum payout, they get about $16,000 per year. Now, one could take CPP earlier than age 65, as early as age 60. But every year you take it prior to age 65, you get a reduction of 7.2% per year. So if you start CPP at age 60, well, you'd only get 64% of the amount you'd be entitled to, which is about $10,000 per year. Now, on the flip side, you can delay taking CPP after age 65. The latest you can delay that to is age 70, and you get an increase of 8.4% per year. So 142% if you delay all the way to age 70. Now, the annual amount that works out to be just over $23,000 a year. Now, if you're looking at the top right-hand side of this slide, you can see that the average CPP pension payout was just over $9,000. So very few people actually get the maximum amount that they'd be entitled to. And that's because they haven't contributed for the maximum number of years, or they have made less than the maximum contribution for each of those years. And if you're wondering how much you would be able to contribute or how much CPP benefits you would receive, the easiest way is to call Service Canada. You could also look it up on their website. So, all right. So there's a lot of numbers here. We're looking at, well, when is it best? Is it best to take it at age 60, 65, or age 70? Well, we looked at it mathematically. And some of it depends of how long are you expecting to live. So this chart, starting at the bottom left, is someone who takes that reduced amount, about $10,000 per year, but starting at age 60. And cumulatively comparing that to somebody in the green line, starting at age 65, taking that $16,000 per year. And then when those two lines cross, that's the cumulative amount that they've received, you can see that that green line then is above the blue line. So we call that where the two lines cross the break-even age, which is age 74. And what that means is that somebody starting at age 65 rather than 60, after they turn 74, would end up with more cumulatively in their pocket than starting earlier. So we did the break-even ages for age 60 versus 70 and age 65 versus 70, which is age 82. And if you remember at the earlier part of the presentation, well, on average, men at age 65 live to just shy of age 85, women just over age 87. Statistically, would exceed that break-even age, even for 65 versus age 70, which is age 82. So would cumulatively have more in their pocket by delaying taking up CPP. So I'll share some statistics about when do people actually take CPP. Well, this is looking at new recipients of CPP by age. 30% of people take it at age 60. Now, then it's like 5%, 5%. Another 30% take it by age 65, at age 65. So cumulatively, 87% of people take it at age 65 or younger. But we know statistically, oh, here we go. You're probably better off delaying taking CPP. So why would somebody take it earlier? Well, what age did they actually retire at? Did they retire earlier? What are their other sources of income to help fund their retirement? What other things? What is their actual life expectancy? Because we're talking about averages. Maybe they have a very shortened life expectancy. It could also be an attitude of, well, it's better to have a bird in the hand than to have two in the bush. So thinking about, well, what makes the most sense for you? And this is where Jackie can really help you make the best decision for your personal circumstances. So you want to do what's best for you and have it as a thought out process. All right, I'm going to switch gears and look at old age security. So just going back to CPP, you pay into it and then you receive out in retirement. Whereas old age security is based on residency in Canada and is funded by the general tax pool. So if someone was a resident in Canada, it's about 40 years, at age 65, they'd be entitled to just over $8,000 per year. Now, with old age security, there's no option to take it earlier than age 65, but you can delay taking old age security past age 65, and you get an increase of 7.2% per year. Now, the latest you can delay taking old age security is age 70, but then you'd get 36% more at age 70. I should also point out that this was introduced a couple of years ago, that seniors who are 75 and older get an increase of 10% more than their payment would be for old age security. So it's something to be thinking about. Now, old age security is a little bit different than other forms of income in the retirement paycheck, if you will. There's a clawback concept with old age security. So when your taxable income exceeds $90,000 per year, old age security gets clawed back. So every dollar you're over that threshold, $9,997, 15 cents of that old age security gets clawed back. So I did the math for you. Once old age security, once taxable income hits $148,000, all of that old age security gets clawed back. So many individuals who are looking at their when they're looking at their taxable income, so we're thinking about seniors, want to make sure that they're receiving the maximum old age security. So what they'll do is they'll try to manage their taxable income at $90,000 or below, at that threshold or below, to ensure that they receive that full old age security. Switching gears a little bit, looking at registered retirement savings plans and tax-free savings accounts. I'll start with the registered retirement savings plans. They've been around for decades, almost 50 plus years. So registered retirement savings plans, your contributions are based on your earned income, which is essentially your employment income or self-employment income. And then there's a maximum. In 2024, it was just over $31,000. And when you make an RSP contribution, you can get a deduction for that contribution. So that reduces your tax bill at your marginal tax rate today. And then you make investments inside that RSP. Those investments will generate interest, dividends, capital gains. Those are all tax deferred until one withdraws from that RRSP. Now, an RSP is really intended for retirement. At age 71, an RRSP needs to be converted to a RIF. This needs to be done in December in the year you turn 71. And then with that RIF, there's RIF minimums that are withdrawn from that RIF, required to be withdrawn. It's 4% at age 65, because you can convert it to a RIF prior to age 71. That gradually increases to 20% at age 90. Now, a withdrawal from that RIF is taxable. So if you withdraw $1,000 from your RIF, it's taxable as $1,000 is in your taxable income. There's no concept if it was the original contribution. There's no bucket if it was earnings, what have you. A withdrawal is a withdrawal and it's fully taxable. So the strategy here is that, well, when you're making that RSP contribution and the deduction for that RSP, you're doing it when you're in a higher or highest tax bracket in your earnings career. And then, so you're getting a deduction at the top or higher marginal tax rate. And then when you're in with retirement, you're typically in a lower tax rate. So not only have you got all of those earnings tax deferred, when you take them out, you're also getting it taxed at a lower rate, additional tax savings. So when we're looking at this chart, we typically think about somebody later in their career in a higher tax bracket. That's a strategy to be investing in their RSP over a TFSA. So let me talk about that TFSA, tax-free savings account. First became available in 2009. So it's been around less time than the RRSPs. And now its contribution room is based on age. Anyone over the age of 18 in 2024 had $7,000 of contribution room. So if you hadn't made a contribution and were over 18 from the time you were in, from the time it was first introduced, say 2009 to today, you would have $95,000 of TFSA contribution room. Not insignificant. Okay, let's go back to this, to the chart. Now, when you're making a TFSA contribution, you do not get a deduction for that contribution. Now, but when the earnings inside the TFSA, so now we're contributing to our TFSA, we're going to invest, we're going to earn interest, dividends, capital gains. Those earnings are tax-free. And then as well, we can make a withdrawal from our TFSA, and that is tax-free. As well as there's more flexibility with that TFSA. If I make a withdrawal from my TFSA, let's say I made a $50,000 withdrawal from my TFSA in 2024, I can recontribute that 50,000 withdrawal in 2025 in a later year. As well as in 2025, I've had another $7,000 TFSA contribution room. So the reason we have this early in the career, perhaps thinking of it, investing into TFSA over an RSP is, well, typically early career, a lower tax bracket. So we don't get the same tax savings that we would get from that deduction from the RSP. As well as sometimes early in the career, we want that flexibility to be able to make that withdrawal and recontribute it in a later year. So those are some things to think about between an RSP and a TFSA. Now, before I leave this page, I also want to look over on in retirement investing in a TFSA. So where I want to think about is because with an RSP, it's based on earned income, as well as when an RSP needs to be converted to a RIF at age 71. So you can't contribute anything more after turning age 71. Now with a TFSA, continue to have that $7,000 new contribution room. So to the extent that you're able, if you have additional funds, using investing that in a TFSA because it's tax-free, as well as leading this into our estate plan. On death, one is deemed to have disposed of all of one's assets, including a TFSA, but that TFSA is tax-free. So then the beneficiaries could receive that tax-free as well. So that's an important thing to be thinking about as well. And again, This is where Jackie and the Northern Savings team can really help you figure out what is best for you. Um, I should also point out registered retirement savings plan, tax-free savings account. I'm emphasizing the word savings here. They're a bit of a misnomer. It should be considered an investment account where we can be investing in mutual funds, ETFs, stocks, and bonds. Think of both of these accounts as investment accounts. All right, I want to move along and think about pension income splitting. So if someone has a pension, let's think a defined benefit pension or a RIF withdrawal when one is over age 65, you can split that income with a spouse. And I'm going to just, there's a lot of numbers on this page, but look at the very bottom section because I want to look in the numbers, like what is the advantage of doing this pension income splitting? So here we have, and the numbers are big, but I wanted to really illustrate this example. Spouse A has $200,000, and that's pension income. And that could be split up to 50% with spouse B. And here's what the advantage of that is from a tax perspective. Well, if spouse A paid taxes on the full $200,000, they'd pay about $65,000 of taxes. Whereas if we're able to split that $100,000 for spouse A and $100,000 for spouse B, they'd each have $24,000 of taxes, combined $48,000, which is $17,000 less than what spouse A would pay on the $200,000 alone. So there's some real tax savings from pension splitting. So as I said, the type of pension, it would have to be defined benefit pension income or RIF income if the recipient of it's called an annuitant of the RIF is 65 or older. This is an annual election that's done on doing one's tax return. And just because you've done 50% in 2024, well, if 40% or 35% makes sense in a future year, you can change up that percentage, but the maximum is 50% that can be split. And there are some significant tax savings to be had. The next piece I wanted to talk about is looking at risks in retirement and how it could derail someone's retirement plan. So what they are, and I'll go through each of these in a little bit more detail, is longevity risk, inflation risk, asset allocation risk, withdrawal rate risk, and healthcare risk. Starting with longevity. So earlier in the presentation, we looked at average life expectancy. Men at age 65, on average, they live to about age 84, women age 88. But that's a 50-50 probability. But then we're looking at, well, what is your 25% probability of how long men, 25% probability, live to age 90. Women, 25% probability of living to age 93. You know, I was at Shoppers the other day looking at for the birthday cards, and there was a section there for 100-year-old birthday cards, which just tells me that people are living longer and longer. And here's the risk associated with that. Well, the risk is that one outlives their retirement savings. And this becomes an intergenerational risk as well, because if mom and dad have outlived their retirement savings, what does that mean for adult children who want to support mom and dad in their final years, but potentially at the detriment of their own retirement savings? So this is a tricky one to navigate, and definitely something that you want to be thinking about planning for earlier rather than later. Inflation. Wow. Inflation has been in the news for the last year or 2 years, and I think we've finally gradually gotten down to our target, close to target 2% inflation rate. But so inflation rate, what does that mean? Well, it's reducing your purchasing power. So what this chart is looking at, somebody who has $70,000 purchasing power today, using an inflation rate of 8%, and we got pretty close to 8% there. Well, over 25 years, and we didn't see it 5-year period, but over 25 years with an 8% inflation rate, that $70,000 of purchasing power would be reduced to just $10,000. And, even at a 2% inflation rate over 25 years, well, that $70,000 of purchasing power is reduced to $42,000. So there's still a significant reduction there. Items like CPP, old age security, those are both indexed for inflation. Some defined benefit pension plans are indexed for inflation, but not all are. So you want to know what is your particular circumstances. As well as there are inflation-focused products available that focus more on gold, or I'm going to say focus more on investments that have historically done well in the face of inflation, higher inflation rates, like gold, real estate, some commodities. So thinking about that as well, which is also a segue into having a asset allocation. When I think back to sort of my grandmother's generation, grandparents' generation, is that when they moved into retirement, put all of their money into very super safe savings, Canadian savings bonds. Well, that probably made sense in that generation where life expectancy was so much shorter, as well as interest rates were so much higher. But for today's day and age, where we can expect retirement to last decades, 20 years, 30 years, or more, where we're in a much lower interest rate environment, well, having asset allocation, not having all your eggs in one basket, can really help mitigate some of the risks in retirement. And again, this is where Jackie can really help you choose a portfolio for your retirement with the objective of having it last for the entirety of your retirement. Which leads to talking about withdrawal rates. So this is a simplified look at it. Trust me. What we're looking at is somebody who has a $500,000 portfolio, and they're just withdrawing of it. At the bottom, we have a 10% withdrawal rate per year, and at the very top in the blue, you have a 4% withdrawal rate. And it's a linear percentage that gets withdrawn each year. Well, if you withdraw a lower percentage versus the higher percentage at the bottom, if you have that lower percentage of a withdrawal rate, well, you're able to continue to maintain that nest egg. And at that 4%, actually able to increase that nest egg over a period of time. Well, there's a couple of things. We've looked at a balanced portfolio returns over about 30 years, a very long time. But if you retire earlier and there's a sudden drop, well, you might want to adjust that. As well as life happens, and very few people actually stick to a strict linear withdrawal rate. And again, this is where Jackie, the Northern Savings team, can really help you determine what is best for you to maintain that nest egg for the entirety of your retirement. The other risk I wanted to talk about was long-term care, end-of-life care. We did a survey. We asked people, what is your ideal situation at end of life? And 97% of people said, I want to age in place. And that's probably the ideal circumstances for most people. But however, there's some things to be considering as well. So we put across here some of the options. Over on the left-hand side, a long-term subsidized care home, probably least expensive for end of life. And over on that right-hand side, well, private home care. This is for those people who want to age in place. If they need something like having nursing care 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, it could be over $200,000 per year, which is a lot of money. And here's what happens, and I'll say it from a female perspective because women, we tend to outlive our male counterparts. So Granny, she has dementia, what have you. The doctors say, well, Granny's got 3 months, 6 months to live, and we know Granny wants to age in place, stay in her home. We know she's going to be most comfortable there. And the family looks at the finances and they're like, well, yeah, Granny can afford that for 3 months, 6 months. We're okay. Well, then what happens is those 3 months, 6 months turn into 3 years, 6 years. We've depleted all of Granny's savings. Then we're looking to the next generation is contributing to keeping Granny comfortable in aging in place. And again, this is coming to the detriment, potentially detriment of those adult children's own retirement or their own lifestyle. So thinking about, and this is a difficult conversation, but it's an important conversation. What does end of life look like? What is the ideal situation? Realistic situation financially, and thinking about that, and it's much easier to have these conversations sooner rather than later. Which brings me into my final topic, is thinking about estate planning. Now, again, this is a difficult conversation because we're thinking about end of life. We're thinking about what happens to our investments. We're thinking about taxes, which is a trifecta, potentially uncomfortable conversation. But it is such an important conversation and also should be thought of as part of one's retirement financial plan. So on death, from a tax perspective, one would record all of their income leading up to the period up to death, as well as they would then they're deemed to have disposed of all of their assets. Now, if there's a surviving spouse, those assets can also roll over to that surviving spouse on a tax deferred basis, but on the death of their surviving spouse, we have that deemed disposition. So it's a little bit like kicking the tax can down the road, if you will. So what happens? What happens is, well, we have that deemed disposition on death, which also includes RIF income, RRSPs are deemed to be liquidated. And often what happens is someone very quickly gets into that very highest top tax bracket. And half of that income that's recorded on death is going to the government as taxes. So, and I have intentionally made the numbers fairly big here. This is an individual who has $1 million RIF. In this situation, that's the only asset that they have. There's no surviving spouse to roll that over to, and they're in a 50% tax rate. So that $1 million RIF, half of it goes in taxes. So the after-tax estate is $500,000. So what if that individual is in a lower tax bracket during retirement and takes out a little bit extra every year and does this for years, for decades? And well, we're able to take an extra $600,000 out of that RIF. And let's just say it's taxed at a 25% tax rate. So what we've been able to do is we've been able to reduce that RIF balance, which has reduced it down to $400,000. And the after-tax amount from that $600,000 is in a non-registered account or a TFSA. And so we have $450,000 there. Because we've been able to effectively get $600,000 of that RIF taxed at a lower rate, well, we've saved $150,000 of taxes, leaving an increased estate to the beneficiaries of $650,000, an increase of $150,000. So small things like this can have a huge impact on your overall estate. Which estate planning, it's a tough, but it really is a necessary conversation. One of the key components, it's not the entire component, but a key component is having a will. It lists what assets, who they're to be left to, how they're to be left. It will name the beneficiary, it will name the executor of the will, who is the essentially the estate administrator who's settling the tax bills, what have you, settling the estate. It's important, in my opinion, to have a will and estate lawyer draft up that will. A little bit about you don't know what you don't know. So the importance of having a specialist do that. Typically, a will and estate lawyer will also draft up what's called a power of attorney. The will takes over for your assets, your property on death. A power of attorney is when one is still living but incapacitated, say Alzheimer's, a stroke, what have you, for some reason. And they've designated an agent to be their power of attorney for medical or financial reasons, financial purposes, to take care of their affairs while they're still alive. Usually these documents are all drafted up at the same time. But if somebody's looking for them, it's probably a stressful time. So are they going to be able to find them easily? So we want to think about this from two aspects. If you're naming an executor, if it's your will, your power of attorney, and you're naming that executor, that agent for power of attorney, you want them to know where they can find that. On the flip side, if you think you're an executor or a power of attorney, do you know for a family member or a family friend, a close individual, do you know where to find these important informations? So much of this presentation, I've talked more about investments and what have you, but what about those physical assets like a cottage or a cabin, what have you? What is the plan for those as well? They often have a much more emotional feel to them. And what is the family governance? Are those wishes known? Will there be surprises to their beneficiaries? Will the beneficiaries feel that the estate has been settled in a fair way? Is it perceived fair? Is it easy for the executor to settle the estate? All of these, I'd say, non-financial factors are also part of one's own legacy beyond the property, the investments, what have you. And those are really key considerations as well. So I like to wrap up my presentations with a quote. I like this one. Spectacular achievement is always preceded by unspectacular preparation. And that really comes down to, well, doing small things, seemingly small things today that could have a big impact on your future, your retirement, and the legacy that you'll leave to your beneficiaries and your loved ones. So I'll wrap it up there. Jackie, I'm not sure if we had any questions come in. Kathy, you're also behind the scenes too.
Yes, I have not seen any questions, but I appreciate this presentation so much. As an advisor, I speak to people about retirement all the time. And a lot of times people, they don't realize how much goes into planning for retirement until it's time to retire. So ensuring that regardless of your age, that you're looking forward, getting that information for CPP and what that looks like. I'm constantly telling people, get online, get a login for My Service Canada ahead of time, because it can be a little bit cumbersome when you want to get in there. So it's such a great topic, and knowledge is power, right? The more information we can provide, the better.
Yes.
And
it is thinking about things sooner rather than you're like, oh, I'm retiring next week. What do I do about that CPP? How much am I going to get? Do I have enough?
exactly. So I just was going to wrap up here. Hopefully I can do this as well. I'm going to share my screen. And yeah, on behalf of Northern Savings, we thank you very much for your time today and look forward to potentially having you on for another session. So,
Absolutely. My
and
pleasure.
thank you for all our attendees for coming out and listening as well. And like I said, we'll send out the slide deck and also share it on our social media so you can share it with your friends.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
Bye-bye.